That's what. Okay. So welcome everybody, and Shabbat Shalom. A lot to cover, so we have to get started. But I'm going to, if somebody sees somebody requesting to be admitted and I don't see it, please let me know. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Some of you either watched or were here last night, but I will repeat just briefly. Of course, this Torah portion mentions both of the teams in the Super Bowl. It opens with a discussion on the part of Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, telling Moses to distribute the work to the chiefs. And so the analysis of this is that Chiefs will succeed only if Patrick Mahomes hands the ball off more than expected. And then redemption comes, as you know, on Al Kanfei Nisharim, on eagle's wings. So those are the two teams mentioned in this week's Torah portion.
And are there biblical references to sport in the Bible?
Yes, it starts out with a reference to baseball in the big inning. and tennis. And Joseph served in Pharaoh's court. If you mean the people playing, the only reference that I know of is not.
Like I was playing.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the only reference that I know of to playing. I mean, there may be some like games that David and Jonathan played, but it says that Yishmael misachek in Yitzchak. Isaac was playing. Ishmael was playing with Isaac, and we don't know what that means. We know Sarah was very upset by it, and that led to Ishmael and Hagar being exiled. The rabbis, some of the rabbis of the Talmud, take that as a reference to sexual play. It just says playing. We have no idea what is meant by that. But in terms of organized sports, probably there are, but I'm not familiar with it, other than my two quips a moment ago.
Maybe the lack of sports, since they didn't know how to swim.
Well, yeah, not as Nachshon said, blub, 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 right? It is, and it later became one of the obligations that a man has to his son. You must teach him a trade, must find a life partner for him, and the third obligation is teach him to swim. Oh, teach him Torah. So there's four. So that is that's what I know of this. I want to open with some background from Sarna, from the Jewish Publication Society Torah commentary. This is, a truly astonishingly remarkable portion. The title of the Ten Commandments, actually here he says the Decalogue. The present chapter carries no designation for this document. By the way, one of the reasons why the Plout commentary that you have in your hands was done in a revised edition, there are several reasons for it. But amongst the reasons is it's very annoying the way the Ten Commandments are laid out. It's like spread over, but we're going to start in a few minutes. There's an intro on page 531, which I may have you look at, but we're going to start on page 539. Page 539 of the Red Plout Torah commentary. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. At one point, we're going to look backwards at 19, one verse in 19, but I think I'll read those verses.
This is wrong.
The English title, The Ten Commandments, is derived from the traditional, although inaccurate, English rendering of the Hebrew phrase Aseret HaDevarim that appears in Exodus chapter 34 and in Deuteronomy chapter 4. And chapter 10. In fact, the term commandment, which in Hebrew is mitzvah, is not employed in the present context. The Hebrew means rather the 10 words, which Jews of ancient Alexandria in Egypt translated literally into Greek as deca logoi, which is where we get the more accurate English rendering, decalogue. In fact, traditional exegesis derived 13, not 10 commandments from the decalogue. And we'll talk about that division shortly. The Hebrew term devarim does appear in the introductory verse, Vayedaber Elohim et kol ha-devarim ha'ela. God spoke all these sayings, speaking them, and we'll talk about the emphasis on speaking in later. In rabbinic texts and generally in Hebrew down to modern times, the common designation is not the biblical one, which was Aseret HaDevarim, 10 sayings, but rather Aseret HaDibrot. That's how you say the 10 commandments in modern Hebrew. And that is a plural of diber, which Jeremiah denotes as the revealed word of God. So it's appropriate in this context. Several biblical texts testify to inscribing the Decalogue on what? How many? I mean, you know the stupid joke about this, right? I give you 15 and you know, commandment, and then Moses drops one and then says, oops, 10, right? The practice of recording covenants on tablets was well rooted in the biblical world, as was also the custom mentioned in Exodus 25 of depositing the document in the sanctuary. There are some examples here I'll skip. In Israel, a special container was fashioned to house the stone tablets, placed in the Holy of Holies. In fact, the Ark, as the container was called, was designated as the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Pact. Why 2 tablets were needed for the Decalogue is unclear, nor do we know the spatial distribution of the text. In much art, how is this depicted? How many on each one?
5.
Yeah. However, the Hebrew distribution of 5 commandments and 5 commandments would lead to a grave imbalance. One tablet would have 146 Hebrew words, and the other only 26. Because the later commandments are really short, you know, don't murder, right? There are other traditions. The Palestinian Talmud has preserved a different tradition, and it says that it's a majority view in the Palestinian Talmud. Another time we'll talk about the differences between the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud. That gives each tablet contained the entire Decalogue, so it was repeated, except Sadia Gaon said one is the version in Exodus, and the other is the slightly different version in Deuteronomy, which is very interesting because if this was carved at Mount Sinai, at the time of the rendering in Exodus, that means that the one from Deuteronomy would have been given at the same time, which is powerful as a metaphor, but nonsense historically, right? But I think, how are they divided? What's the basic division of the 10 commandments? 2 kinds of commandments.
One is to do with God, the other is to do
Bein Adam L'Makom, between us and God, and the other,
between you yourself.
Bein Adam L'Chavaro, right? With between us, between human beings. That's right. Less obvious is the manner in which the number 10 is obtained. Here there are varying traditions, and this centers on, well, one of them you know, is what we consider to be the first commandment really a commandment, right? Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant counting of the 10 commandments is different. The Jewish view is, I'll get to that in a second in here, he goes into it. And the next is whether verses 3 and 4 are treated as a single item or two distinct commandments. Here, so the first question is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Is that a commandment? Jewish tradition says that that is number one, right? It helps here by the fact that we don't use the term commandments. It's 10 sayings. So that's a saying, right? That is a speaking. That makes it easier to understand that that would be number one. Then it says, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make any likeness of any image. Jewish tradition says, you shall have no other gods before me and not make any likeness is one commandment together, right? Catholic tradition says those are different. Well, again, let me get to that so I get it right. On each of these issues, rabbinic tradition favors the first alternative, which leads to the total of 10. Another approach is taken by Philo of Alexandria and by Josephus, both reflecting early traditions in Jewish life that make verse 3 the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, and verses 4 and 6 the second. Roman Catholic and Lutheran traditions interpret verses 3 and 6 as the first commandments and divide verse 14 into two commandments. And by the way, if you're ever talking to a Christian about the 10 commandments and you're confused, this is one of those places where our demarcation of the verses and their demarcation of the verses are not exactly the same. So what we say is one verse, they might cite another one. So if you're looking at a Hebrew Bible in English and they're looking at an Old Testament in English, we might not be talking the same numbers here. Don't worry, we'll get to the reading eventually, but here's one other, there's a couple other things I want to share. In the Mishnah, we learn that in the days of the Second Temple, the Decalogue enjoyed a special status next to the Shema in the daily morning service. And there is some evidence that the Decalogue was one of the biblical passages contained in the Tefillin. At some point, that practice stopped. Why do you think we stopped having the 10 Commandments as part of the daily service every day in the morning and having part of it in the Tefillin? What is the danger?
That the ones in the Tefillin are considered more important?
That and that's for the liturgy also, right? That you would say, oh, this is all that was given on Mount Sinai, because in fact, the Torah says this is all the Torah says is given at Mount Sinai. The claim that the entire Torah was given at Mount Sinai is a claim made by later tradition. And the idea of emphasizing the 10 Commandments in the daily liturgy or in the Tefillin would undermine the claim of the equal importance of the entire Torah. And by the way, there are many people who talk about the 10 Commandments as if it's what? Give me an example. What?
Universal to all religions.
Universal to all religions, and the Jewish equivalent of what would then be called universal or natural law. In what ways is this not universal to all religions?
It doesn't apply.
Which parts?
Having only one God.
Are you unifying God with idols?
Honoring mother and father.
Jews don't like polytheism even for people who aren't Jewish. So that one's dicey. But the idea of I am Adonai, your God who brought you out of Egypt is specific to Jews. But one commandment in particular is for Jews.
But whatever's not in the Noahide laws is
Well, that's what I'm getting to. Is the Noahide laws. Shabbat. Shabbat is this, right? So listen, this used to be the cocktail party question for rabbis. What's the cocktail party question for a profession? When you're making small talk in a social setting and you tell them that you're you own a shoe store. What's the most common question you got?
You open on Saturday.
Well, are you open on Saturdays, right? Norman, what's the most common question you got?
That's true.
Are you open on Saturdays?
I think so.
Okay,
What size are you?
what size am I, right? Can you guess what, right?
Can I get a deal?
What?
Can I get a special deal?
Can I get a special deal, right? If you are, I don't know, give me an example of another profession. If you're a lawyer, what's the most common question that you get in small talk, Anna?
Well, the
I got a
most,
parking ticket. Can you help me take care of it?
yeah, that's not the one I get.
How can you defend?
Oh, what do you
How
get?
can you defend people who are obviously guilty?
Okay.
I
Anna?
I get people asking me questions about the death penalty.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know why.
So the cocktail party question for rabbis in the 1970s was,
Why are you working on Shabbat?
oh, Rabbi, I'm a good person. I'm a deeply spiritual person. It's like I'm not religious or anything, but I follow the 10 Commandments. Isn't that enough? Right?
Yeah.
So the cocktail party question for rabbis in the 1970s, early 80s was the equating the 10 Commandments with natural law. By the way, what was the cocktail party question for rabbis in the 1990s? Oh, you're a rabbi. Do you?
With your faith. marriage?
Yeah, that's it. That was
You are?
overwhelming.
What?
Absolutely,
You do
positively.
interfaith
Do
marriages.
you do interfaith marriages,
Oh.
right? But the attitude was that this is the equivalent of universal moral law. That's the kind of reason why, people in the Deep South wanted to put Judge Roy Moore said, put the 10 Commandments up on the wall. It's true, it's one of the foundations of Western law, but no more so than Greco and Roman roots. And also because Jews, Protestants, and Catholics count 10 Commandments differently. The moment you put them up on the wall, the government is choosing one version over another. Right? So it's endorsing one particular religion over another. The concept that there is something here that is about all human behavior is not wrong. But in Judaism, as Anna said already, every religion has a concept of universal law. That is, every religion has a concept that of what its practitioners have to do, and also of what should apply to all human beings. Here, in this regard, it's interesting to note, what does the word Catholic mean?
Universal.
The word Catholic means universal. So the intention of the Catholic Church is that everybody should be Catholic, right? But even within Catholicism, there are things that Catholics do and things that they think should apply to everybody, right? Non-Catholics shouldn't take communion, right? That is a Catholic ritual.
When?
But, I don't know the attitude towards Lent because I don't know what the Protestant attitude toward that is and how Catholics relate. I mean, the whole issue of who takes communion is loaded because there are Catholic churches that are comfortable administering communion to Protestants. I was told when I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, and at the dedication of a cathedral, I was sitting next to, in the row of priests and ministers, and the Episcopal bishop was sitting next to me, and he said, you could get in that line, but they'd think you were in the wrong profession.
Rabbi, do they fudge Shabbat by just changing the date?
That's still not universal to everyone, though. And it's not clear that it's a universal concept that there has to be a day of rest. I mean, the very interesting thing about that is that a very educated Christian will refer to Sunday as the Lord's Day. If the first day of the week is Sunday, then Saturday is the Sabbath, right? In France, the first day of the week is Monday. So maybe you can call it the Sunday Sabbath, but the whole concept of basically, if you were gonna form a religion, Norman, and call it Normanism, and have it be normative, one of the first things you do was choose a different day to observe the major holiday, because that's the way that you differentiate. You know, I would have picked on you, you know, for forming a religion, but we already have that already, Judaism. But so you know, the Christians did, what?
A lot of people call me Judy by accident.
Interesting. The Christians did a different day, Muslims did a different day. So control of the calendar is one of the power moves that a religion makes when it is trying to differentiate itself.
The authorities, or let's say Hinduism or Buddhism or Confucianism, do you know whether they have?
I don't. I should know that, but I
Any
don't.
Shabbat
I don't know.
equivalent?
Does anybody know? Is there a Shabbat for Buddhists? We're supposed to live in a state of never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. So in Judaism, there is a tradition of universal law. That is, I can't judge a Baptist for not observing Shabbat, because they don't have to observe Shabbat or keep kosher or whatever. But I can judge a Baptist for going around and killing people. The concept in Judaism of somebody who was called righteous but who wasn't Jewish, because Judaism didn't exist yet, was Noah. And so the tradition developed of these Noahide laws, the 7 commandments of the children of Noah, as the basic concept of universal law that applies to everybody. Those laws include don't murder, don't rape, don't steal, and you have to have a lawyer. Right? That is one of the 7 commandments of the, by the way, animal cruelty. Ripping the limb off of a living animal is one of them also. Don't do that. But you have to live in a society that has a system of administering justice. In order to be considered a righteous person, there has to be a mediation institution, an institution that can mediate righteousness and appropriate behavior. So interestingly, that's one of the 7. So in Judaism, that is what makes you a good person, not whether you keep kosher or not. I mean, if you're not Jewish, right? From the point of view of Jewish law, yeah, you can judge people who are eating bacon. Reform Judaism may have changed that, but you know, from the point of view of the internal system of Jewish law, you can judge Jews for eating bacon. You can't judge Catholics for eating bacon. So that's our concept of universal law, the Noahide commandment. So the idea that the 10 commandments represents that is very popular, but not actually accurate.
Rabbi,
Yes.
on the 2 scroll topic we were talking about before, what is each scroll in the same language?
There, you mean the 2 tablets?
The
Well,
2 tablets.
you know, I have a tie that is a tie that is a copy of the Rosetta Stone. That would be fascinating if it was meant that way. There is a tradition that the Decalogue took place where? And Mount Sinai is where? Who knows?
Someplace in the Sinai.
Right, well,
Maybe.
and it is considered, there's a Jewish concept called Hefker. Hefker means unclaimed. It is land that is, you know, belonged to no nation, and therefore, why didn't Sinai take place in Jerusalem? It was so that it could be accessible to any nation. There is a notion that this was issued in every language of the world simultaneously. So the notion of language is there. We're going to come back to the notion of language in a moment. But I want to start going to the text by pointing out 2 verses that are not in the 10 commandments, but surround them.
Can I go back and ask the question?
Sure.
The 10 Commandments that was on the courthouse wall that you talked about, Was people's objection to it because of the particular version they chose? being-
No, that's my objection to it.
Right,
The people's objection to it was this is a religious
that it's
document.
religious, not.
Yes, that's
civic.
correct. And the court rulings were about that. It didn't focus on the fact that,
Okay,
in fact, sometimes you have weirdly Roman numerals abstractly representing the 10, right? So first of all, is it really 10? Secondly, Roman numerals. Thirdly, what is the role of religion? I mean, there is a role of religion in the United States. But it's a conceptual one, not a legal one. The concept in the Declaration of Independence. Let's go back. What is one of the founding legal doctrines in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, from the 12th or something century? The Magna Carta. It's a charter, a great charter. It's a charter in which a king delineates rights. But rights that are given by a king can be taken away by a king. What is the foundational religious notion of the United States? It is a religious notion. We are,
Inalienable rights.
which are endowed
Or
by our Creator. Rights that are given as on the basis of our inherent status as human beings cannot be taken away. This is a fundamentally religious notion. It's just not a specifically Christian notion. So but nor is it a particular religion that is represented by that notion. And by the way, we talk about universal law. That's where this comes from. What religion was Jefferson more than any particular branch of Christianity? He was a deist, right? Which is sort of really followed this idea of there was a natural law, a universal law. Okay, I want to read and contrast two verses. Exodus 19:20 and Exodus 20:19. So I don't know what pages these are on. So I'm just going to ask Toby, do you have a Bible that you can easily find these in?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So Toby, why don't you read Exodus 19:20
Okay,
and then jump to 20:19.
okay, well, 1920 from what in this version is the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai. Is that right?
Stop. That's it. That's all I want from that. And Adonai descended on Mount Sinai. Okay. Now let's jump to chapter 20, verse 19.
The Lord said to Moses, "Thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens."
Stop. What's the problem?
One is from the heavens and one is from the mountain.
Right. Where is God? Is God on Mount Sinai, which is in the earth, or is God speaking to us from the heavens? You can fudge this and say that a mountaintop reaches into the heavens, but let's leave the fudge for that place in Ocean City which makes such good fudge. Let's take this seriously. We are talking about something which is a very big problem. We are talking about talking. And why is talking about talking a big problem? After all, we said these were Aseret HaDevarim, which became Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 divine speakings. What's the problem with that?
That assumes God speaks.
As I said last night, that assumes God has a body. That assumes God has a body. Our tradition says that God doesn't have a body. Now, our earliest notion of God may not have said that, but our tradition certainly, how can God speak to us?
Yeah, but the word speak doesn't mean we're speaking loud,
Yeah,
but I'm not sure what term to use. But implying, speaking can mean implying or passing on thoughts or.
In general,
Making-
yes, but the very use of the term dibor here and the setting here and the great sounds and you heard the colors and you saw the sounds, it says. The very notion, if you read chapter 19, of things being topsy-turvy and upside down is almost like this is a unique moment. Anna. Oh,
Why are we making a big deal about this now when God spoke to Moses and Abraham, and the concept of speaking isn't the first time that the Torah says God spoke to.
it is one of the only times when it focuses on and seems to imply direct revelation to the group. It's not the only time that God has spoken to individuals, but this is in the language, in the surrounding language in chapter 19 and at the end of the Ten Commandments. This is a unique. It is clear that this is a unique revelation in the Torah. So the question is,
No, I understand that, but why are we questioning the word speak here and not how did God speak to Moses? How did God speak to Abraham if he didn't have
okay, so my answer to that would be the rope follows the bucket. It's so obvious a problem here that once we raise it as a problem here, yes, the same question applies to all the other times. I do have that problem with all the other times too, but I really have it here.
Well, I think it's less
But
of a
it-
problem here.
You think it's less of a problem here?
Less of a problem here because if instead of starting with Exodus 19, verse 20, you start with Exodus 19, verse 19, at least as it's translated here, as Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. And
Well-
if you go then to Exodus 20, verse 19, you yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens. Well, that's where thunder comes from.
So,
So it does
you,
seem to be.
on the one hand, you can argue that either way, right? You can use Jim's out and say that the speaking could be like inside our own heads, except that thunder is actually audible. And therefore, this becomes a unique example. I mean, what does Elijah say? God is not in the fire. God is not in the thunder. God is in he ultimately, the word called him is not, a still small voice is the mistranslation. It's soft murmuring sound, but it's in the quiet, not in the, right? And the idea of God being in the quiet, this is uniquely the opposite of that. Wherever it originates, it's audible.
Because
like the eye of the storm.
What? Yeah, like the eye of the storm. I'll never forget you're telling us before Irma, what to expect in the storm. And don't open the door, you said. If you're in one room, don't open the door from one room to another. Yeah.
Does the Hebrew use a visual verb where it says you yourself saw and then that I
Yeah.
spoke?
Yeah, but it also has basically you saw the sound and you heard the sight. I mean, it's really messed up here. It is doing everything it can to convey that this is unique, that this is different. The senses are turned upside down. So listen to this from Da'at Sofrim on 1920. You descended on Mount Sinai in comparison to you saw that I spoke from the heavens. From this apparent contradiction, we can learn that at the moment of the giving of the Torah, everything reverted to the primordial state of creation before the Holy One had made a separation between the heavens and the earth. For at this hour the earth was joined with the heavens, the distance between them removed. In Jewish tradition, Sinai is utterly unique. And Jewish tradition wants to make Sinai unique. It doesn't want God talking to us like this all the time. So much so that what does the tradition say? Not only did God give the entire Torah at Mount Sinai, the written Torah, as Moses is writing it down, Moses is asking questions. And God is answering. And so this is the foundation of Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism teaches that God gave the written Torah to Mount Sinai and the oral Torah. And the oral Torah is passed down orally until certain times when it gets written down, as in the Talmud, as in the law codes, as in any question that anybody would ever ask about Judaism anywhere. Moses asked God on Mount Sinai, including the one that Shelley will ask next week. But Shelley's going to ask it next week in English. So how did Moses know to ask that question? Well, he's a prophet, right? So the metaphor here is incredibly powerful. I really don't know, even ultra-Orthodox Jews, I guess they take this really literally. The way that I would illustrate this is, what does God have to say on Mount Sinai about toaster ovens? And the answer to that question is, if you know the proper category that toaster ovens goes into, you'll figure out where in the vast compendium of Jewish law toaster ovens fit, right? In other words, this
You
is
don't
a
need them to
moment
ship.
in time, and time is finite, but this is a moment that is infinite. It is a space, it is a place that is every place. That all I can think of here is the TARDIS in Doctor Who. The TARDIS is this blue British police box that travels in space and time. And by the way, lest you think that I'm making this up, let me flash forward to next week, where the beginning of Mishpatim says, "These are the laws that I place before you." And one of the most powerful readings of this is going to be before you, not spatially, temporally. And I'll explain why that's so powerful next week. It's before there are people. Sometimes people, the law may be filtered through people, but there's this concept that is primordial, that is before the person, or the differences represented by people. So this moment at Sinai is a great undoing of creation in order, and the rabbis want to say this only happens once. That's why there's the moment of creation. Then there is the moment of revelation. And all we do in all of Jewish tradition after that is unpacking or understanding or reinterpreting that moment when the divine made itself available to the human. That is Sinai. And last night I told this story, but I will tell it again now. There are things that we can't understand that we still have to give voice to. One of the ways we do that is by paradox. How do a group of individuals become a nation? It goes through the ocean on dry ground. You can't go through the ocean on dry ground. That is a paradox. But whether you say that that is the birth canal, after all, the waters broke, right? Or it is simply just saying this is a moment that happened but is not possible, right? Think about any moment of change. In order to be something new, there has to be that moment when you stop being what you were. That is a dangerous moment because you are unraveling. You are stopping what you were in order to, and the role of a community in life cycle event, under the chuppah, in the middle of a wedding, there's a moment when the couple is no longer single, but not yet married. That's a dangerous moment. They have unraveled. To help them re-ravel in the right way, that is what the community is for. But transition is about this unmaking in order to remake. We are remaking a people here. We are remaking the world here, remaking a vision. It sort of goes back to creation. All of this is here in this story. And the story I told last night, which tries to reconcile the idea of what is audible and what is not audible, of what is spoken, what is not spoken, and what the people hear and what Moses hears, is at the end of this, it says, the Ten Commandments, it says, the people said, Moses, we're afraid, you go get the rest. But maybe it wasn't after the Ten Commandments. Maybe it was just after the first commandment. All God said was, I am the eternal your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And they freaked out and they said, Moses, you go get the rest. But maybe it was just the first word. Anochi, I, the very existence of God freaked them out. And they said, wait, this stuff is real, Moses, we're done. You go get the rest. But maybe it wasn't the first word. Maybe it was just the first letter. And the first letter of the first word of the first of the Ten Commandments is the letter Aleph. And the Aleph, unless it has a vowel,
Has no sound.
the sound of silence. This is what we call the pregnant pause. It is an emptiness that is filled with everything. And ironically here then, by this metaphor, the Orthodox tradition is correct. If you really hear the emptiness, then everything is in nothing. And everything is connected. And what we experienced at Sinai may well have been the entire Torah, because it was the entire everything. So the hearing, the silence, the infinite becoming finite, the everywhere becoming somewhere, all of this is implied in the idea of God speaking to us. Shelley.
First of all, the Torah is brilliant because it's relevant today. It has never been irrelevant, no matter what we've been through in generation, thousands of years. And to think that this is how it happened, it's just amazing that we still have it.
Well, I am someday going to write a book called Something Happened at Sinai. I've been talking for a really long time, and I do want to do a shameless advertisement at the very end before we stop. But so let's go to the actual Ten Commandments and start. I think that this is all of this stuff that we're talking about is meant by, this is an unpacking of what is here. I think there is a contradiction between 1920 and 2019. I think that the idea of an infinite God communicating to us is so impossible, and yet so universally perceived to have happened, that this language of paradox is appropriate for describing it. So, chapter 20, verse 1 and following. Who wants to read?
Oh, I'll be happy to
All right,
read.
Toby, go ahead.
All right, God spoke all these words, saying, I, the Lord, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods besides me.
Okay, stop. Is this one commandment or two? Or one commandment and part of the second one, right? Jewish tradition says, I am the Lord, I, the Lord, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the bondage. That's the first saying, the first commandment, right? What is that commanding if it is?
Believe in one God.
Introduction.
Okay, either it's an introduction, or it's belief, or can you command belief? Interestingly enough, what is the 10th commandment? 10th commandment is do not covet. Can you command an attitude? Right, so the first commandment and the 10th commandment are not typically some things that are subject to commandments, right? One's an attitude, the other's a belief. So I like that balance between 1 and 10 in that regard.
It's often seem to me that Jews are very comfortable in America because our laws normally don't say anything about what you have to believe.
Can you hear him? Good.
They say what you have to do and what you may not do, but they don't say this is what you have to believe. You may think that a law is ridiculous, but you're obliged to obey the law. You may think, well, the speed limit here is not what it should be far greater or far less than what it is on this particular stretch of road, but no matter, you have to follow the.
In that regard, it's, you know, in Jewish law, you can put 5 Orthodox Jews around a ham and cheese sandwich on Pesach. And they can have 8 different opinions about why they can't do it. They just can't eat it. Unless, by the way,
We're starving to death.
somebody puts a gun to one of their heads and said, you blow this and you eat this or I'll blow your head off.
Yeah,
In which case, what do they say?
of course.
No,
Life takes precedence.
no. Amotzi lechamina aretz, because you wouldn't eat it without a bracha. That one's original to me.
Rabbi,
The beginning one was not original to me. Yes.
I wanna beg the question as to what the first commandment is.
Uh-huh.
I know this isn't gonna appeal to you or me
Yeah.
for that matter, but it said God spoke all these words. Is that a commandment that these are the words of God and that you have to follow God's words?
That's brilliant. I love it. I mean, I don't know what to do with it, but it's reframing, because so that way, again, that's another way of getting beyond 10, of course, right? But you know, you could say the frame itself is or if Jim is right that this is an introduction, the introduction to the introduction is also a commandment. So
Think
let's go
about
back.
the ultra orthodox would love that, because then this was all written by God and it says so, and you
Correct.
have to
That's
believe
correct.
that.
Not only is belief in God, but the belief that this is all written in God as a separate commandment. And so, yes, that works from that point of view. So is belief in God a commandment in Judaism? My experience tells me one thing and Maimonides tells me something else. What does my experience tell me? Somewhere in Erie, Pennsylvania, I think Sam Tannenbaum is still alive, who told great stories. He has 5 boys. They are 25 years apart in age. And when I was in Erie, and his youngest was 30, which meant his oldest was 55 at the time, he told me the story that he was in the store, same store he was working in then, which means that he was working there for over 55 years. And some nuns came in when they were trying to have kids. And the nun said, oh, we'll pray for you. And after the 5th kid was born, 25 years later, the same nuns at the same store, not much changes in Erie. He said to them, well, you can stop praying for us now. Sam Tannenbaum was a devout, devoted atheist. 2 of his kids are rabbis, and another one is very active in Jewish life, but devout atheist. He was at services every single Friday night.
Religiously.
Religiously. Steinberg goes to synagogue to talk to God. Bergstein goes to synagogue to talk to Steinberg. In my experience in Jewish life, you know, Jewish identity is both cultural, folk, tribal, and spiritual. And as such, there are a lot of atheist Jews. Maimonides would disagree. Maimonides says the first of the 613 commandments is belief in God. Maimonides lived in a Muslim setting. I'm sure he was influenced by that in that regard. So Maimonides would not have a problem saying, I, the Lord, am your God, is a commandment. I would say it's an introduction. Okay, so then, you shall have no other gods before me. And I'm a little uncomfortable saying this as the rabbi of Beth Israel when we get to verse 4. As I looked around last night and in our sanctuary as well. First thing I did when Shelley took me into the sanctuary was do a double take. Why?
Images.
It is, I can't argue against it because first of all, they're beautiful. And second of all, they brought those stained glass windows with them from Atlantic City. Unlike many Reformed synagogues, this congregation was founded as a Reformed congregation, one of the early congregations in the Reform movement from the late 1800s. But you just don't see images of people in very many synagogues.
Isn't that picture of
It
the woman
is
with her
an
hair?
issue. There are conservative Jews in this community who won't join here for that reason.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
It is jarring if you are raised in certain Jewish settings to see images of people. It just is very rare, but it's not against halakha. It's against custom. It's not against halakha. Sometimes people interpret custom more strongly than halakha.
But Rabbi, I think it depends on what you do with those images.
Absolutely, and they're not images of God; they're images of human beings.
Well, I
Right?
mean, you and I have had
Muslims won't even have images of animals or something. It's entirely geometric. They take it much further, right? And look what they do to people who do an image of Muhammad. I mean, that's like crazy anti-iconographic. But in general, Judaism was mildly anti-iconographic. Is that a word?
Yeah.
So anyway, the question then is verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me, besides me, which Toby read, connected to verses 4, 5, and 6. In Jewish tradition, verses 3 through 6 are the second commandment. So let's read them as one commandment. So Toby, go back to verse 3 and then take us through verse 6.
You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Okay, comments. So for Jews, that was all one commandment. That was all commandment number 2.
Again, I think it's critical how you interpret or how you treat things. And you and I have talked before about mezuzahs and how some people, particularly in the ultra-Orthodox religion, treat mezuzahs, which to me is more of a worshiping of something other than God.
Did I tell you the time that 4 Chayalot, 4 Israeli women soldiers got killed by a roadside bomb during the Lebanese war? And the Sephardic chief rabbi said the scrolls in their mezuzah in their homes must have flaked off and not been kosher anymore. Yeah. So one can think of something vaguely as a talisman, but when you take it that far and ascribe like magic to it, that is problematic. Obviously, one of the main problems here is the visiting the guilt of the parents on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. The second part of this is the basis for what prayer? I will remember but shown kindness to the 1000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. What prayer is that a reaction to? What? Well, the love is ve'ahavta, but this specifically is, I think, the basis for the avot v'imahot. Oh God, remember Abe, Ike, and Jake, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah? I'm their great, that is called the Zechut Avot, if you're Orthodox, the Zechus Avos, or if you're Ashkenazi Orthodox, right? The Zechut Avot, the merit of the ancestors. The idea that, our very descent from the people who were close to God ascribes, right? On the other hand, what is this visiting the guilt of the one generation upon the third and fourth generation? That's problematic.
But that's to make us fearful enough that we'll behave.
So it is a motivator. You could view it that way, right? There is the person who takes this head on in the Bible is Ezekiel. Ezekiel says, there's an old saying that the parents shall eat sour grapes and the teeth of the children shall be set on edge. And Ezekiel says this is not true. It's not fair. Only the one who is guilty shall be punished. Ezekiel is reacting against this idea. How are the two eventually reconciled? God gives out just desserts, but let's say, which is not true, that Norman is a terrible person. And Shelley is a terrible person.
I was gonna say Rabbi Kushner, but you went on a completely different tangent than I was.
Well, right. And let's say Aaron, Shelley's daughter, is a terrible person. And let's say Noah, who's not got a mean bone in her body, is a terrible person. Well, look,
For
Noah may
those of
get,
you on Zoom, there are 4 generations that belong to the temple.
so Noah may get punished for doing something wrong, but she may get an extra zzz, right? So the way these two are reconciled is God will only do what is right by each person, but there may be an extra zap for, right? That's how this is interpreted, right? Now, I have to say, this is a wonderful family, which is why I picked on them. So go ahead. You meant Harold Kushner, not Larry Kushner, I assume, Anna?
Yes.
Why, bad thing. So what did you think I was going to do with this?
Well, you're basically agreeing that there's some sort of punishment, which means that when bad things happen, they deserved it. And yet,
No, I'm trying to figure out what this means. I'm not saying what I believe, right? What I
no,
personally,
I understand. But if you say that somebody is going to if God's going to show kindness to you on the, on the shoulders of your ancestors, but then things don't work out so well for you, then that means they weren't good people either. And so God's not showing kindness to you. Or that you've done something or they've done something wrong and now you're being punished for it. And then you mix in, like, why do earthquakes happen and why do hurricanes happen and what do these people do and did they do something to deserve this? This whole
and this is not an old image.
no,
They pull somebody out of the rubble alive, and you hear the throngs of people shouting, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is great, God is great, God is great. How great is God for the 24,000 and counting that didn't get pulled out alive from the rubble? I mean,
170.
It's a human emotion, but as a theological statement, it stinks.
Should say God is fickle.
They said God is, that's right, that's right. We
Well,
should
no,
say,
but that's why I mentioned Rabbi Kushner, because at the end of the day, it isn't God who's causing these things to happen.
yeah, well, yes, and the counter to that is, so what good is God? And then you have to build up a whole sense of whatever. I mean, Maimonides would be helpful here, because Maimonides did not believe that God caused things, because if God causes things, that means God can change. And if God
empowers you to change, and God empowers you to
that's what good God is. God empowers us to change. That's right. I'm with Jeanette here, though. The very first paper that I ever wrote on a computer was in graduate school, and it was called the motive clause in Deuteronomy. And my girlfriend at the time did the search and replace function. When I printed it out, it read the Santa Claus in Deuteronomy. I'm glad I caught the joke before I handed the paper in. Right? A motive clause is something which motivates you. And we've got another one with the parents, right? The commandment for parents: honor your parents in order that you may have a long life on the land. That, right? That's a motive clause. Is it meant literally? I mean, there are people who take it literally. But that is a motive clause, and therefore, Jeanette, I think you're spot on about, like, the powerful motivation purpose here. Let's go to verse 7, Toby.
You shall not fear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name.
So, what's that mean?
Don't lie when you're in front of a judge.
Isn't that commandment number 9? Right?
Well, it depends. Because false witness means that you actually witnessed something and you're saying it falsely.
Okay. So this could be more general, that could be more, I do not know what this commandment means. That's all I'm gonna say for now, because we're running short on time. I want to get to a couple more. Verse 8, Toby.
Remember the Sabbath day and keep it
Stop.
holy.
Stop. What does it say in Deuteronomy? Keep or observe. Here the word is zachor, remember. One of the major differences with the version of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy, you all know this, right? In Deuteronomy it says, observe the Sabbath day. This leads to the verse in Lachadodi, Shamor, you sang it last night, Shamor v'zachor v'dibor echad. Dibor, by the way, the use of commandment there, or speaking there. Remember and observe in one command, in one speaking, right? We can spend a long time. What's the difference between remembering the Sabbath and observing the Sabbath? What does it mean that there's that difference there? But remember is the version that it says here. And keep going, Toby.
6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea.
Stop.
And all.
In Deuteronomy, what is the motivation for the Sabbath observance is a reflection of creation. It is tied into nature.
Right.
It is a spiritual reason. It is a faith reason. What is the reason in Deuteronomy?
They finished creation,
No.
the end of the work.
Ki eved hayita, for you were slaves in the land of Egypt. You shall rest and you're right. It is a folk reason. It is a communal reason. Faith, folk. Those of you who know me know this is my big thing, right? Faith and folk. So the reason, the motivation for the Sabbath day is different in Deuteronomy as well. The rest of the commandment is the same. Go ahead, Toby.
For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Okay. Any other comments? Next one.
Honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning to you.
Okay.
You
Any
shall
comment
not.
here? What? In Leviticus, it says, revere your mother and your father. What does the tradition make of the difference there? In one place, honor your father and your mother. In another place, revere your mother and your father. You could spend a lot of time saying revering the maternal instinct to revere your parent, but the honoring has to do with obedience, has to do with your father. Baloney. What is the difference that the tradition gives for reversing the order?
You always know who your mother is, but you never know who your father
Maybe. But I would think the fact that the tradition has both
The
indicates,
woman comes second. And then the woman comes first.
and then the woman comes first, right? In other words, they're equal. That is, the fact that it's reversed in another place is later interpreted to mean they're equal. And God created the heavens and the earth in Genesis. Isaiah refers to God who created the earth and the heavens. It doesn't mean that the original writer saw them as, the one who wrote the one, but this is one of those examples of how the Bible is an anthology and it originated different things for different reasons, but it has its impact as a whole. So that later on, people look at the Bible and say, oh, it says it this way, and this way, and therefore they're both equal. That is a later read back into the Bible, but it's a useful one. Losing my voice here completely.
What about the act of the hook that, you're honoring your father and your mother so that you'll keep the land?
So that is a very powerful motive clause. And it's
That's because if you don't honor your mother and their father, they'll write you out of the will.
Or kick you out of the house?
I love that.
Could it-
All right, you're 2 for 2
could
today.
could it also mean honor your mother and your father, that you may endure on the land which the Lord your God gave you? In other words, if you honor your mother and father, then you will perpetuate the faith from generation to generation.
So in this case, the land could, ultimately, the land we inherit is our spiritual community. And so, yes, for the period of time that we were landless, as it were, it can still apply in that way. All right, you want to take us home, Toby?
Sure. You shall not murder.
Stop. Sorry. That does not say you shall not kill. They are different things. I have, in fact, I did not stop a taxi driver in St. Thomas and say, the thing you wrote on the back of your Safari vehicle is a mistranslation. Actually, I may have done that once. But I have approached people at pro-life rallies and said, you're wrong. It's not murder. If you want to say it's killing, fine, but the state defines what is and is not, and it's not murder.
What's the difference?
Because the law doesn't, or at least didn't, say that you can't do it.
Right, that's right.
If
Murder
the
is
law
something
says you
defined by
can't
the
do
state.
it, then it's murder.
If it said you shall not kill,
Right.
what would we do with, wars? What would we do with capital punishment? Whether you're favored or not, the Torah clearly allows capital punishment.
We'd all be vegetarians.
Right.
You could
Right.
apply it to other creatures if it said you shall not kill.
Right.
The commandment does not say you shall not kill. You can view abortion as immoral killing, but as defined, it's not retzach, it's not murder. But for the state to carry out capital punishment is not retzach. You can say it shouldn't do it. It shouldn't be legal, right? But it is harigah, it is killing, but it is not murder in the same way, right? There is a difference. There is a different Hebrew word for kill, and this isn't it. So all I want to point out is this: you can disagree with my interpretation, but you can't disagree with the fact that there is a different word for kill, and this isn't it. This Hebrew term does not say you do not kill. It says do not murder, right? Disagree with everything else I said, but you can't disagree with that, because I'm right about that.
And
The rest was opinion.
and there are places in the Torah think it's in Numbers, not sure, but anyway, where you have to, where everyone who's drafted into the army has to pay a shekel, is it, or a half shekel? Anyway, half shekel tax for the sake of of a sort of atonement
Absolutely.
for having to kill in war. You're drafted into the army, chances are you're gonna kill somebody on the other side, and therefore you have to make expiation. You have to pay this half shekel to the sanctuary.
Okay, next, Toby,
You shall not commit adultery.
stop. By later definition, Clinton was guilty. By the biblical definition, he was not. Why?
Because
Who was not guilty?
Bill
Clinton.
Clinton.
He did not have traditional intercourse.
Right.
Yeah, let's say he had, he still wouldn't have been guilty
He's not
She wasn't
married.
married?
She was unmarried.
because she was unmarried. Originally, this meant either party was guilty, but a man, married or not, having intercourse with a woman married to somebody else, right? The ironic part about that is there are certainly examples of cultic prostitution in the Bible, and there certainly are examples in the Torah of men having multiple wives. So the original meaning of this, later tradition made it, much more balanced and equitable, but originally this was, I don't quite want to say a property crime, but a violation of exclusive use, as it were. There's a lot more. There's a lot more we can say about that, but let's go on. Toby,
We shall not steal.
stop. You walk into an expensive dress shop, and you spend hours trying on clothes that you have no intention of buying. Is that theft?
I think it is.
What could make it not theft?
Buying the artist, buying the item.
Or
If you're honest, you thought you might.
telling
Sales.
the salesperson in advance,
Right.
there's almost no chance I'm going to buy this, but I want to see how it looks. Then it is the person who works on commission's choice what to do with her time. But not telling her that is a form of theft. A lot of other things are as well. Okay, go ahead,
You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor.
keep going.
You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave or his ox or his ass or anything that is your neighbor's.
Okay, and that is the end of the commandments themselves here. We then get the after effect in the next few verses, but I wanted to say a few other things. There's something about verse 14 that I dislike strongly. And what is it?
Oh, because you can't regulate what people feel. You can
yeah.
regulate what people do, but you can't regulate their emotions.
Yes, although I do think that one kind of can lead to the other. So that's not what bothers me as much.
Wife is considered one of the possessions.
That's correct, and it's not even that that bothers me, but it is a gender issue. It's the fact that by listing wife as one of the possessions, that makes the word you male.
Now,
That's what bothers me so much about this one. So that may be all we have time for, except that I wanted to do a shameless commercial. Before the commercial, any closing comments or thoughts about the Ten Commandments?
Quick
Well,
question.
one of-
your comment about the St. Thomas taxi drivers last night, I understood you to say that they all had that on the back of their shirts.
Not the shirts, it's, Anna, where is the Ten Commandments? It's on the back of what?
Usually I see it on the back of a Muslim taxi.
It's what, the Ten Commandments? It's not just Muslims. No,
No,
the
no, no.
safari,
Say again?
isn't it on the back of the safaris?
It's only, I've only seen it on the back of a Muslim safari or taxi.
Really? Wow, 'cause
I don't think I've ever seen it on a Catholic safari.
Interesting, okay, but it's a big sign on the back of the vehicle.
Oh. Okay. It just has a picture of the Ten Commandments?
No, it's got the listing of the Ten Commandments,
Oh,
which is
okay.
like has them written out in English,
Okay.
and it says do not kill.
And my question goes to where we were some time back, chapter 20. We were at verse 19, but if we go on to verse 21, make for me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them you have profaned them. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it. And my question is, how did the people who built the temple deal with this problem? Because they obviously used hewn stones, and they had this, and they put it up high on a hill.
Yeah.
And they had to walk up steps, which had been uncovered now.
Yeah, I've seen a midrash about that and I don't remember it.
Okay.
So I don't know, but it's a great question. I want to mention something. Can I borrow that for a minute? I want to mention something briefly about today's Haftarah portion. And then I want to say something about Haftarah portions in general. So the Haftarah for today is from Isaiah chapter 6. What is Isaiah chapter 6? You'd think it would be Isaiah chapter 1. It's the recruiting scene for Isaiah, in which Isaiah is brought by angels and he has a vision of the heavens. And when he beholds the angels, they are saying to one another, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tsevaot, Melo Chol Haaretz Kavodo. The words that are in the middle of the Kedusha prayer, holy, 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 or if you're Catholic before 1960, sanctum, 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 right? The Lord of hosts, God's presence fills all the earth. In other words, the Haftarah portion linked with this Torah portion is the moment of revelation of God for Isaiah. And that leads me to my shameless self-promotion, which is I highly recommend, never mind the fact that I have 3 selections in this book. So do like about 100 other rabbis and canners. This is a really interesting book. This just came out. It's called Prophetic Voices, Renewing and Reimagining the Haftarah. And for each Torah portion, but also for American holidays like July 4th. I wonder if there's somebody coming here for services.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's unfortunate because I was going to tell you my voice is giving out here. I mean, that's fortunate that somebody's coming. For each Haftarah portion, we have interpretations of the traditional reading, but then alternative modern versions that could be used with that Torah portion. I have 3 selections, one of which I will tell you on the verse in Leviticus that says, was somebody coming in?
That's real tall guy.
Oh.
I don't know his name.
Okay,
Coming in.
all right, well, we'll be over.
No, I'm glad.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Hi,
Hello.
we'll be going into the chapel for services in a minute. Although my voice is sort of giving out, but for Leviticus, where it says for Tazria, a pregnant woman brings an offering of something, but if she doesn't have enough money for it, she brings something else. The selection that I recommended for the Haftarah reading for that day is from Karl Marx. From each,
According to his means.
according to his ability, to
Ability.
each, according to his needs. And in my interpretation of it, I say, look, obviously, societies founded on the teachings of Marx have been particularly problematic, especially so for Jews. But there is something here to this notion. So that was one of my offerings. That was one of the 3 pieces I have in here. This is a really, really, really interesting book. The essay by Jonah Pesner, the rabbi who's the head of the Reform Movement Religious Action Center, at the very beginning, is really worth it. He quotes, I think it's Franz Kafka, who is talking about Isaiah on Yom Kippur. What is the Haftarah reading for Yom Kippur morning?
So you're gathered, you're all of you,
That's the Torah.
your elders.
That's the Torah.
Oh,
And by the way, that's only the Reform reading.
okay.
That's only the Reform reading. The Haftarah on this Day of Atonement and fasting is, I despise your feasts, your fasts. You do no good to do this ritual when you oppress the poor and so Franz Kafka says, imagine the original scene. People are fasting, people are doing ritual, and somebody comes in and says, your ritual is worthless. This is like a leopard walking into a synagogue and roaring and swishing its tail. And then, by the 3rd time it happens, the leopard has become part of the liturgy. What a great statement. That is, this is revolutionary stuff. It should turn our lives upside down, the Haftarah readings. But the very fact that we've ritualized them leads us to forget their original power. This book helps us recall the original power and suggests modern alternatives that could do the same. I mean, come on, I'm surprised they published it. Karl Marx. They assigned me 3 portions. And I did. I said, well, let's see if they take this. They published it. Anyway. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom and thank you.
Let
Shabbat
me
Shalom.
stop the recording.